everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to the F and Sunny show. My name is Richard. I'm your special guest host for today. And with me is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Ef'n Molina.
How you guys doing?
And today is a very special show, something that's going to be really awesome. So for all of you out there, if you have Amazon Prime and you have not seen the documentary, The Last Narc, I absolutely, positively recommend you go and watch that. It is awesome. Probably one of my top documentaries that I've seen ever. And it basically tells the story of the most notorious drug murder in history, the 1985 murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena, and how it relates to the Mexican cartel, the CIA, various things, but it's told in a way that has never been done before. And it's an incredible story. And we're so lucky today to have the filmmaker who directed the documentary, Mr. Tiller Russell.
Thank you very much, Stan. I appreciate you having me on.
No, thank you so much for coming on board. Now, Tiller, just tell our viewers, you know, what is it that got you into filmmaking, and what was it about this story that drew you to it that you said, hey, I want to make a movie about this?
Well, to answer your first question, what got me into filmmaking is I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and my dad was in the district attorney's office there. So I kind of grew up knocking around the precincts and courthouses and, you know, police stations and whatever else. So I was always kind of knocking around that world. And then I went on to become a crime reporter out in California. And then one night I went to dinner doing a profile on the documentary filmmaker Errol Morris and had this fantastic evening with him. And at the end of the evening, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You're either going to spend the rest of your life writing about people like me, or you're going to go try your hand at this." And I literally quit my job at the newspaper the next day and knew that I had to go sort of make the attempt to be a filmmaker.
Very cool.
As to this particular story, this is a story that I have been very fascinated by and passionate about for a long time, about 14 years actually. I first heard about the story from a journalist friend of mine, a guy named Charles Bowden, who's a sort of legendary crime reporter and covered the border for many years. And he told me about Hector Berreyes, who is the DEA agent who ran the investigation, and kind of the incredible and astonishing lengths he went through to solve this case. And he said, "This is the biggest story in the history of the drug war, and nobody knows the truth about this." And then after, you know, that journalist, Chuck, passed away, I sort of felt like he was passing the baton on to me. So I took it and ran with it to tell the story.
Now, Tiller, I know that a lot of people may not know what this is about. You know, it's titled The Last Narc, and some people may have maybe seen the Netflix show Narcos Mexico, where this is kind of the central story. But for those viewers that don't know the little bit of the backstory about what's going on, would you mind sharing, you know, what your documentary is about?
Absolutely. You know, as you mentioned, it is about the most notorious murder in the history of the drug war, which happened in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1985, and was the kidnapping, torture, and murder of an agent named Kiki Camarena. And what this film is, or multi-part series is a deep dive investigation into what really happened, how this agent died, who was involved, and kind of a 3-decade conspiracy that stretches from, you know, the killing fields of Sinaloa to the halls of power in DC.
And how long did it take you to film this movie?
I think we shot for about a year. You know, a lot of the way I work is it's building the trust and relationships with people ahead of time. So a tremendous amount of time and energy goes into getting people feeling completely that they're in safe hands and that they're with somebody who will respect and tell their story in an honest and unflinching way. And so a lot of the time was spent in advance of that. And then by the time we started shooting, it probably took, you know, over a year, I would say, to do it. And we did a series of interviews with each of the key people, and then would edit for a while, continue shooting, whatever else. And it probably took about 2 years from the time we began shooting till the time we finished.
Now, in the documentary, there's the 5 central characters that you're interviewing are called the 5 cops. For those that have not seen the documentary, would you kind of explain who they are and what you have to do to kind of gain their trust? Because each one is a very different personality that had a very different role in this story as a whole.
Yeah, the five central characters that are in the story are a DEA agent by the name of Hector Borrellas, who was the agent who was assigned to investigate this case. What happened to the murder of Kiki Camarena back in the day, and spent about 10 years investigating it. So he's the central character of it. He comes across three Jalisco state policemen who go on to become cartel bodyguards for the Guadalajara cartel, who eventually go on to become his informants. People who were actually there firsthand, first person in the kidnapping, in the torture room, and know exactly what happened. So it's those three cartel bodyguards turned informants. And then finally, it's Kiki Camarena himself, who in our film is sort of represented by or articulated by his wife, Mika Camarena, who tells the story from her perspective about what it was like living through this and the sort of incredibly painful journey of losing her husband and then having to unravel sort of the truth of what happened over many years.
And did you come across any particular roadblocks as you were filming? I mean, whether it was stuff with maybe the Mexican government or with the people in your film, you know, the five central characters, was there anything that kind of was a hurdle that you had to kind of jump over, or everything that kind of went according to plan?
Well, it's, you know, in documentaries, nothing ever goes according to plan. That's both the sort of fun and the challenge of them, because, you know, when you begin something like this, you don't have any idea really where the story will go or what you'll be told or what the impacts or implications might be. And so it's just a question of following it wherever it goes and not being afraid to do so. And so it was, you know, there were many challenges. Initially, just getting people to talk. And then when you're talking about something like this, that's a murder, you know, for which there's no statute of limitations, that has legal systems on both sides of the border, you know, in Mexico and in the US, it's very serious stuff. These are incredibly high stakes. And although it's something that took place in the past, like I said, there's no statute of limitations. So that's always, that's a huge hurdle going into it. Fortunately, these folks, after spending the time with them, were, they carried a lot of weight and pressure and I guess trauma and pain, in their hearts from knowing the truth about what had happened for all these years. So in a way, I have to be both very mindful about contending with people's trauma and what that really means. And at the same time, you want people to be able to be completely honest and emotionally available and vulnerable and be there for it. So I think in a way that was the toughest challenge, is knowing that it was like very serious material that has profoundly affected all these people, and doing it in a way that was truthful and thoughtful.
One thing that I thought was really, really awesome was that the five central characters, as I'm watching it, I was just glued to the screen, because, I mean, you're dealing with people who were living it, who were there, individuals who were in shootouts, who were actually a part of the kidnapping of Kiki Camarena. I mean, what was going through your mind as you're hearing all of this information from firsthand accounts? I mean, my mind was blown. I mean, what were you feeling as you were listening to these stories and processing all this stuff going on?
It's a really great question. It's interesting. As a filmmaker, what I try to do in any project that I'm involved in is, in these nonfiction stories, what happens is everybody only experiences one piece of it, right? It's as if they're all spokes in the wheel, and all they know is their perspective and what they lived through. And so I feel like my job as the filmmaker is to be the quiet center of the wheel, and to let each one of those spokes kind of connect to it and be a vessel for it. And so it's always kind of profoundly powerful and shocking to be hearing these different perspectives and of these people, because I do firsthand, first-person stories. If you didn't live it, if you weren't there, you're not in my movie. And so with all of these people, they did. And then by the time you end up putting together all those different perspectives, what you end up getting is kind of this like kaleidoscopic portrait that's seeing it from a bunch of different perspectives. And so my goal as a filmmaker is to like immerse you, the audience, fully into that experience and kind of leave it to you to judge. I don't want to make a moral judgment or sort of draw the conclusions. I leave it to you to figure out, and I want to kind of plunge you in that experience from multiple perspectives. So that's the goal going in.
Awesome. Efren, you got to watch a documentary. What did you think? What are your thoughts on everything?
Oh man, when I was watching it, like halfway through, you see all of the characters, and in my mind, I'm thinking, who is this director that has the guts and the balls to do this story? I mean, you're one of the like unviewed characters. You directed it.
I'm the damn fool at the center of it. It's true. This, in the sense of it's a highly personal piece of filmmaking, because it is like what you're articulating, which is I'm the only person that's talking to everybody and hearing everybody's perspective. And for me, for whatever reason, this is something that like grabbed me by the throat and grabbed me by the heart. And it was like, man, I have to do this story justice. It's an important story that these people lived through, and it's important for the world to know it and to know the truth. And so it is scary going into it. It's serious people and it's serious institutions that are involved. And but I think like my job is to like walk into that dark cave and shine a light and try to tell you the story, tell you the truth.
Well, Killer, you're dealing with a lot of this story deals with a lot of high level stuff, when it comes to Mexican government officials, the CIA, potential cover up. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. Did you ever, during your filmmaking, and even now, have you ever felt threatened by anybody? Are you afraid that somebody may take this personal? I mean, this is very, very serious stuff, and I don't want to give away the what happens in the last episode, but I mean, my eyes were like bugged out, my jaw was to the floor, I was in shock, and I was like, wow, like I cannot believe this. So what have you? Has anything happened? Have you had to deal with anything?
It's another really good question. I take the severity of the story and security very seriously. Because like I said, you're dealing with a lot of powerful players. You're dealing with the cartel, you're dealing with the Mexican government, you're dealing with Mexican cops, you're dealing with the US government, the DEA, the CIA. These are a lot of incredibly powerful like institutions, and also in many cases individually very dangerous people. So I take that very, very seriously, both the safety of my subjects and was very careful about not disclosing details about where the interviews were filmed, where those people currently are, because it's serious stuff, particularly for them, who are going forward and literally probably risking their lives by telling the story. So that's something that I take very seriously. And then as for my own safety, yes, it's something that I am cautious and careful about. And yet at the same time, I feel like it's the work of the journalist. It's the job to kind of get forward and to go out and tell those stories that need to be told. And that if you are open and honest and putting the truth out there, that's the best protection that you can have. Like, I'm not a gangster. I'm not a cop. I'm a storyteller.
We kind of have something in common. As you direct movies, as lawyers, we direct stuff like in a courtroom. The difference is you have post-production, we don't. If we screw up, it's
You're live. You're live to tape.
Yeah.
We're done.
We deal with the consequences, yeah.
No, it's a very astute point, because I mean, really what you're doing is you're telling a story. You're trafficking in a story. In the courtroom, what you guys are doing is constructing a narrative. This is what happened. These are the, and it's counter narratives. You have your narrative as, defense attorneys or prosecutors, and, the opposition has its narrative. And so what you're doing is you're telling a story. And you're using other people and their kind of firsthand unfurling of what happened to them to create that narrative, which really is exactly the same job. And the only difference is kind of like post-production in that sense, in that we're able then to spend, in this case, like years kind of carefully shaping, okay, who do we go to here? And then we cut to this person here. And that's where, a lot of the actual storytelling and crafting of the story happens in the edit bay in documentaries. It's such a crucial part of the process. And that's why, those collaborators, I had a, absolutely brilliant and amazing team of collaborators working on this. And it's having those different voices and the ability to continue to sort of shape it, refine it, make it better, that, that's the luxury of it. Whereas you guys are real time now.
Tiller, it's a funny story, but I told my mom about this documentary. I was like, hey, Mom, you just got to check this thing out. This is crazy. And she's like, is that the one about, Kiki Camarena? I'm like, yeah. She's like, I don't know. Like, I think she remembers living through that time when that was, the news back in the 80s. Did you have, and it's very gruesome. We get to hear a lot of stuff that I would have never known. And it was a horrible, horrible situation that happened to him. Did you get to speak to Kiki's wife and family, and how did they receive your film, and what were their thoughts on it?
It's incredible. I think the truth is that it's a incredibly painful and raw, and to this day, open wound for them. What they went through, and I don't want to speak on their behalf. I leave it to them to articulate their feelings or conclusions about it. But what I can say going into it is, it was with incredible respect and love that I went and talked to Kiki's widow, Mika, and because she's just been through such a profoundly traumatic experience for so long. And so I just really, it was really important to me to get as close to the truth as anybody's ever got, and painful or not, bring it to the light so that the world could really see it and hopefully closure could be drawn. And it was an honor to be able to spend the time with her and hear the story from her perspective, because it's powerful stuff.
And sometimes we take certain cases, and we take like those cases, and when we resolve them, we kind of come away with certain like life lessons. We're like, wow, we learned this about life with this case. Did you learn like any like life lessons or any insight on life from doing this documentary?
Another really great question. I'm just kind of now coming off the back of it, having just sort of like finished it and put it out into the world. And I think, oftentimes it's with the passage of time, kind of the lessons become clear. For me, it was like, I guess it was kind of a sacred undertaking, in some sense or another, telling the story, because this is a story about the system failure, and like the system not working. And I think kind of like we're at a time culturally where all of us are reckoning with like all of these massive system failures, from the like crisis in policing to, the pandemic, to the sort of like political upheaval and chaos worldwide. And this is like one small specific story about, a failure of the system and how it has lasted and reverberated for all these years. So I think, if anything, the lesson for me personally was never give up on the truth, and never be afraid to get it out there wherever it goes, and chase it wherever, like, if it's true and if it's real, it deserves to come to light, and follow it wherever it goes. So that's what I took away.
Now, Tiller, usually, and I know when you probably had tons of footage that you had to edit down in order to get it into, the final film. But was there anything that you left out on the cutting room floor that you're like, man, that was really interesting, and that would have been kind of cool to show? Is there anything that just sticks out in your mind that you could share with us today, or you pretty much got everything that you thought was pertinent into the documentary itself?
Another really great question. The way I work is I do these incredibly exhaustive, intensive interviews. They're like week-long interviews where we're shooting, 10, 12 hours a day with everybody. And so everything is covered in excruciating, extreme detail. A, because I'm conducting the interviews in isolation, so I can sort of cross-check what this person says with what that person. And B, because you only get one take to shoot it, right? So it's like, so you want to be as thorough as possible. And so a tremendous amount gets left on the cutting room floor. And each one of these people could have their own whole like documentary or movie unto themselves. I mean, Hector's life journey and like his kind of way up in DEA long before he ended up in, working this case, the Camarena case. He lived in the era of what they called rock and roll law enforcement, where it was like a gun and a badge and some buy money and you were raising hell on the streets, and like just the like sort of capers that he was in on both sides of the border and, in LA and whatever, there's an entire TV series worth of material there. And then same is true with the sort of, with the cartel, with the cops turned cartel bodyguards turned informants. Like each one of these guys has lived lifetimes worth of experience, in the time that they've been on Earth. So yeah, there's all sorts of crazy stuff, meetings with Pablo Escobar, $1 million bets. And, there was all sorts of crazy stuff that got left on the cutting room floor. But, we wanted to hew very closely to, the beating heart of the Camarena story. So all that stuff ended up kind of, being put to the side. So
in other words, Richard, we have to buy that DVD when it comes out that has all the extra features.
It's funny. You know what? It was funny. It was occurred to me the other day, like with the hours and hours of material, unseen material that we have, it's like, there's a 10 episode podcast like with that material that's already shot, like that's kind of waiting to be made. So, or maybe we remake it as a movie or a TV series, or we'll see. I'd like to get it all out there because there is a lot more to tell.
Hector was such an interesting character, and you're right. There was that cowboy, law enforcement, and he came across very likable. Were there any of the individuals that you interviewed that genuinely kind of scared you as you were kind of there with them and talking to them and listening to their stories? Did you think like, man, like I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little freaked out right now by this guy?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, the truth of the matter is what those guys, particularly the cartel, bodyguards turned informants, like what those guys lived through and like personally participated in was like pretty extraordinary, hair-raising stuff. I mean, mind-blowing stuff, quite frankly. And when you're sitting in the room with, these are not people that like saw this stuff happen. These are people that like did it. I mean, one of those guys, was literally laying hands on Kiki and grabbing him and kidnapping him outside the consulate. So, it is, I think, chilling to be in the room with people, that had to do what they had to do to survive, And I think the goal with me is always like, I'm here now and I'm here to bear witness to the story. So I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to judge. I want to be a vessel for the story to come out and kind of put all of that personal, internal stuff aside to let them have their chance to have their say. But yeah, it's scary.
Now, wow. You mentioned that your dad used to work in the district attorney's office?
In the DA's office, yeah.
And did your dad have the opportunity to see your film?
It's a good question. I have not. I need to check in with him. He and I haven't talked in a little bit. But he was the one that was kind of instrumental in sending me on that journey. In fact, going back to the Errol Morris thing that I mentioned at the top of it, my dad was in the DA's office, depicted in The Thin Blue Line. The famous film that Errol Morris, Henry Wade's DA's office, which was this kind of legendary kind of cowboy DA's office. And so, were it not for my formative experiences with him in that world, and like that's I've imprinted on that, and my entire professional life has kind of followed out of that. So I'll have to check in on him and get the review from my dad.
And speaking of reviews, are there any talks or any buzz of any awards or nominations that the Last Narc might be?
I don't know. It's a good question. Where I think that Amazon is in the process of sort of submitting it to all those places and doing whatever. And at the end of the day, I have a funny relationship to the like press stuff in the sense of I sort of make a point of actually not reading or watching kind of criticisms and whatever, or praise, whatever it may be in the reviews and the papers, because I sort of don't want it to get in my head one way or another. If it's positive, I don't want to, sort of get puffed up about it. If it's negative, I don't want to be thrown off course about it. So I don't actually know what all the sort of like reviews have said, but I know that Amazon, I think was very pleased with the show and is putting it up for a bunch of stuff. So, God willing, it'll get, nominated for something.
Yeah. If I could vote, I would vote twice.
Exactly.
And how can people follow your upcoming films, your upcoming projects?
I've got a couple of things that are coming out at the top of the year, and some of them haven't quite been announced to the press yet, so I won't go through all the details. But there's a Netflix series that'll be coming out at some point in January, which is another crime story set in 1985. And then I've got a movie that Lionsgate is distributing called Silk Road, which was about the Ross Ulbricht and the kind of Amazon for drugs that was the Silk Road marketplace, with a wonderful cast with Jason Clarke and Nick Robinson. And
Oh, nice.
a really great, wonderful set of actors and collaborators on that. So that's coming out in the beginning of Q1 next year too. So those are upcoming projects, Night Stalker and Silk Road. And then my previous work, Operation Odessa, which is this kind of crazy international crime caper about these three crooks who once sold a submarine to the Kali drug cartel and lived to tell the tale. I think that's currently on Netflix right now. And then The 7-5, which is the movie that we were talking about before, which is the kind of portrait of police corruption in New York City in the 90s. I believe is on. I believe that's on. Maybe on Prime right now, or that that you can buy it, or it's on Apple or whatever. So they're out there.
Wow.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Tiller, man, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today. It really, really means a lot, man. It's always a cool feeling to get to talk to a filmmaker that you're just like, man, you're a big fan of their work. You just you get that little jitters, man. It's really awesome. So thank you so much for stopping by and talking to us.
I'm really grateful for you guys' time, and thank you for caring about it and taking the time and interest and the thoughtful questions. I really, really enjoyed it. And I wish you guys all the best.